Hello, everybody. It's Philip Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Monday, the 12th of July, 2021. Our topic today is what does it mean to be an American? So click on the subscribe button down here on the lower right to subscribe and also the notification bell in the upper right. All right, so let me pull up my notes and we'll get started on what does it mean to be an American. When speaking at a naturalization ceremony last week, Joe Biden couldn't resist an opportunity to promote so-called diversity when he said, "You can't define an American," close quote. The president's remarks prompted Klavan, or Andrew Klavan, to respond with an analysis of a 1936 short story by Steven Vincent Benet, who was the namesake grandson of a Union ordnance officer during the Civil War, who later rose to become the head of the Ordnance Department after the war. When our high school English class read Benet's quote, "The Devil and Daniel Webster," close quote, short story, we perceived that Americans valued freedom over security. At least that seemed to be the message of the story. An American would not whine for imagined entitlements. Since our history is shaped by all of her citizens, America has not lived up to her ideals. But even after nearly 250 years, there's not a better approximation of them in the world than America. That is why outsiders continue to eagerly migrate here. They want to live in a country unified by such principles of freedom and opportunity equality, not equality of outcome. New Hampshire native Daniel Webster was one of America's most important senators in the first half of the 19th century. He is most famous for his 1830 speech in defense of the Union during a debate over secession. He concluded, "Liberty and Union, now and forever, one and inseparable." In 1850, abolitionists accused him of putting Union above liberty when he supported a new Fugitive Slave Act, even though it was a component of the Compromise of 1850, which kept the Union intact until the Civil War, about 11 years later. In Benet's story, after a long string of bad luck, a New Hampshire farmer named Jabez Stone breaks his plow on an unseen rock and declares, "It's enough to make a man want to sell his soul to the devil, and I would do it too." The next day, a mysterious stranger named Scratch arrives at his doorstep and offers to grant Jabez 7 years of good luck in exchange for his soul. Although Jabez discerns that Scratch is the devil in disguise, 7 years seems like a long time, and he strikes the bargain. Ultimately, the reckoning day arrives and Scratch returns. At first, Jabez tries to renegotiate the contract. When Scratch opens up his notebook to show Jabez the signed contract, a moth-like creature flies out and with its tiny voice squeaked, "Neighbor Stone, help me. For God's sake, help me." Jabez is horrified to recognize the voice of the town's miser, whom he had seen alive and well earlier in the week. Jabez asks if he might hire Daniel Webster as his lawyer. Since Scratch would like to entrap Webster as well, he agrees. When the three meet the following night, none of Webster's arguments work because of Scratch's signed contract. Finally, Webster argues that the contract is illegal because no American can be compelled to serve a foreign prince, and Scratch is a foreign prince. Webster is surprised when the demon argues that he too is an American. Quote, "When the first wrong was done to the first Indian, I was there. When the first slaver put out for the Congo, I stood on her deck. Mr. Webster, my name is older in this country than yours." Given Scratch's citizenship claim, Webster argues that Jabez is entitled to a jury trial. Scratch agrees, but uses his supernatural powers to assemble a jury of notorious but deceased, corrupted politicians and traitors and outlaws. For a judge, he chooses the man that sentenced innocent women to death at the Salem witch trials. Webster tries to make his case, but all objections of the defense are denied and those of the prosecution sustained. Eventually, he became enraged and intended to launch into a diatribe that would use every trick in the book, regardless of whether it was legal or not, or regardless of whether it would help Jabez, his client, or get him in contempt of court. Finally, it was time for him to speak again. But before he started, he looked over the judge and the jury for a moment. He noticed the glitter in their eyes as they all leaned forward like hounds just before they get the fox. Then he saw what he'd been about to do, for it was him they'd come for, not only Jabez. If he fought them with their own weapons, he'd fall into their power. It was his own anger that burned in their eyes, and he'd have to wipe that out or the case was lost. He stood there for a moment and then he began to speak. He began with the simple things that everybody's known and felt: the freshness of a fine morning when you're young, the taste of food when you're hungry, and the new day that's every day when you're a child. They were good things for any man, but without freedom, they sickened. And when he talked of the sorrows of slavery, his voice got like a big bell. He talked of the early days of America and the men who had made those days. He admitted all the wrongs that had ever been done. But he showed how, out of the wrong and the right, something new had come, and everybody had played a part in it, even the traitors. Then he turned to Jabez and showed him as he was, an ordinary man who had hard luck and wanted to change it. And because he wanted to change it, now he was going to be punished for eternity. And yet there was good in Jabez Stone. He was hard and mean in some ways, but he was a man. There was sadness in being a man, but it was a proud thing too. Yes, even in hell, if a man was a man, you'd know it. He wasn't pleading for any one person anymore. He was telling the story of the endless journey of mankind. They got bamboozled, but it was a great journey, and no devil could know the inwardness of it. It took a man to do that. Webster looked at the jury for a moment and saw that the glitter had gone out of their eyes. The defense rests, he said. When the judge asked the jury to retire for a verdict, one stood and said, "The jury has considered its verdict. We find for the defendant, Jabez Stone. Perhaps 'tis not strictly in accordance with the evidence, but even the damned may salute the eloquence of Mr. Webster. In sum, the devil is a metaphor for centralized government that promises to provide all of our needs. Initially, we are briefly satisfied, but eventually we learn that we become subjects of a tyrannical government led by a small group of cultural elites that progressively encroach upon our freedoms. For example, we don't need critical race theory to tell us that slavery and racism was bad. My high school Southern classmates read The Devil and Daniel Webster 60 years ago. It's been 45 years since Alex Haley's Roots was published. Nearly all Americans living today are well informed about the evils of slavery, and we don't need a centralized government or a giant teachers union to dictate CRT to us and cram it down our throats." Okay, that's what I have to say about the making of an American. But here's a book you may enjoy: Lee's Lost Dispatch and Other Controversies of the Civil War by me, Philip Lee. The Lost Dispatches was at the Battle of Sharpsburg, or Antietam, if you know it by that name, in which McClellan got a copy of one of Lee's orders and knew the disposition of his troops and should have been able to have defeated him. But that didn't happen. This book is $19 at Amazon. It would be, if you like an autographed copy, it'd be $22 from me, including postage here in the United States, signed copy. Okay, if you want to do that, you should, if you want an autograph copy, you should email me, Phil, Phil_Leigh, Leigh, at me.com. Okay, that's our show for today, and thanks for watching.